Right. Hey everyone, I'm Klloo. So, wonderful start to the day, right? Alice has posted a new video on the Flesh and Blood channel, and that is, of course, Dev Talk 13, which is not just relating to Aurora and her LLing. No, there's quite the plethora of topics covered in that video, so definitely do go give it a watch if you haven't already. But my main takeaway, right, regardless of the actual points discussed in the Dev Talk, is more so the continued transparency and community engagement that they are definitely showcasing, especially around some hot button topics at the moment, reprints and pricing. So that is beautiful to see, and I'm going to have an absolute fun time combing through all the community comments, right, and gauging some information that I have been sort of digging for. But before we jump into the crux of the topics, I thought, why don't we just go over a quick summation, or at least my takeaways from the video. So, Living Legend and ban time is currently under the microscope, right? They want to be a bit more thoughtful, but also aggressive, meaning more ban windows, but also more breathing room for players to actually adjust their decks. When it comes to the lifespan of a hero, they're aiming for around 12 to 15 months for a top tier hero. And while LL is currently bit turbulent, going back and forth, depending on the hero that allows and the cards that are being restricted. They're not quite ready to give up on the Living Legend system, which is absolutely perfect, right? Again, it is a fabulous system. It just needs a lot of fine-tuning and balancing to make sure it functions as it should, right? Then when it comes to talented heroes, they're favored due to their ability to help build the world, right? Convey the connection to the area along with the classes involved, as well as their ability to showcase certain mechanics and interactions when it comes to actual game design. So talented heroes are not going away anytime soon. They are in full effect, and they are some of the heroes that LSS likes to create the most. Now, when it comes to Aurora, her armory deck was sort of a special case. Usually they like to pick from the middle ground to lower end of heroes, but the Aurora armory deck acted as a completion to the player pathway, right? So we had the First Strike deck, the Blitz, the armory deck, and then, of course, translation to actual competitive games. So Aurora being just the poster child for all of that, while being fantastic establishing those pathways, obviously has now led to that downside of the Living Legend system, which again goes back to them wanting to continue to refine and tweak it. Now, we have exact confirmation that we will be seeing Aurora specifically again, 2026, somewhere between May and June, but currently with Aurora, again, no longer being available in Classic Constructed, Ira will constitute the next progressive pathway. You can pick up the Welcome Ira deck still, right, until August when it swaps over to Bravo, and soon you'll be able to pick up her armory deck, and that will act as a nice introductory pathway for new players to then transition from starting the game to Blitz to armories to then competitive Classic Constructed, hopefully. Now, the big topics that piqued my interest was the talks about value proposition, right? So the aim is for long-term gratification and, of course, prolonged utility, relating back to that Living Legend system, right? If Living Legend was essentially as popular as Classic Constructed, then basically all the cards would be maintained, which would be a perfect world, right? General pricing of play pieces presents an opportunity for more high caliber reprints. I do want to zero in on the fact that they do label them high caliber reprints, so when that comes to mind, we have Command and Conquer as the one cited for the Hunted, so anything around that price point or that ability, right, slotting into a lot of decks, to me is what I convey when they say high caliber. Now, there is a high caliber reprint in High Seas, and that is one of two surprises in stores, right? There's still something cheeky lurking right beneath the water. I'm putting money on a pirate hero, right? Because he gets giddy if you ever watch him, talk about upcoming heroes or something spectacular when it comes to specifically heroes. He gets a certain way, so I feel like that's the other surprise. To me, at least, it's a hero, and I would assume, in that case, a pirate hero, right? And, of course, more reprints to come in the expansion slot and utilizing new products, so probably mastery packs and armory products going forward. Now, zeroing in on, first off, the Living Legend stuff, right? So Living Legend and ban time, again, is going to be continuously under that microscope, right? Currently, the main thing that they have said as a definite is more ban windows, right? So they're going to be banning more regularly, restricting or fine-tuning the game, if you will. Now, when it comes to this 12 to 15 month lifespan of a top-tier hero, if we go back and dig through some old articles, right, a hero's lifespan to LSS at the point of this article, right, for a good lifespan, so not a top-performing hero, but just in general, would be around that 15 to 20 months. So again, if we sort of place it with the charts that they did provide, right, so estimated months to LL, we have a 30% or higher event win rate being within that 12 to 15 month lifespan. And when it comes to Aurora, although she was presenting and she was definitely winning, one thing that they did make evident was statistically she wasn't, something as egregious as, say, Zen, right? She was just there in full force by numbers and popularity, more so than just being a dominant deck for the sake of dominance. Now, I'm not saying that Aurora and just a 0-4 aggro line with a splash of Arcane isn't pretty absurd, right? I think the Arcane should probably make up for a little of that 4 stat line, but it's still worth noting that although she did LL quickly, part of that is to do with the cards, part of that is to do with the community adoption of her as a frontline hero. Now, when it comes to the not ready to give up on LL, right? Again, the Living Legend system is something that will need to adapt and evolve over time so that it can continue to serve its purpose and support the longevity of the game when, again, it comes to card utilization and maintaining those values and, again, just allowing game pieces to have a full shelf life where they come in and out of the game, but in that sense, kind of always relative, right? And that's is most problematic when it does circle back to those talented heroes where we have those cards that are, in a sense, very niche, but also powerful. So we have a talented hero, and the majority of Living Legend heroes are talented, right? In fact, they are all talented except for Viz, who is the sole Runeblade, right? Another thing to probably worth note is a lot of them are Runeblades and a lot of them are Illusionists also, right? But mechanically, what this means is these are the heroes that need to be reinserted into the game over and over again, right? Because those are the cards that get heavily restricted when one of them leaves. If a base Guardian leaves, well, the Guardian cards translate to another Guardian, or they translate to a talented Guardian. So that in itself is a little bit more forgiving than when a talented hero does rotate out. Now, the big question, I think, on a lot of people's mind is, how strong should a new hero be out of the gate, right? Do we want these heroes that do, again, fulfill that lifespan of, be it a couple months, 7 months, or 12 to 15 months, or that good lifespan of 50 to 20 months, or should they be slotted on that lower end when it comes to the actual win rate, right? Should they be not necessarily the powerhouses to show off the set, but just a mechanical expression that, again, will get better over time as some of the other heroes fulfill their places, right? Because a lot of the time, you know, there's one hero that pops back up, and then a huge focus on the new heroes, and a lot of heroes just get swept aside in that sense. So that is something that, again, is very much up in the air on the discussion side of things, right? Because it's part public opinion, it's part LSS and their functionality towards, again, selling products and pushing products, because having a hero that's strong will boost sales. Now, when it comes to Aurora's pathway, right? So again, we had our Blitz deck, part of the Blitz collection, right? We had our First Strike deck, we had Rosetta itself, and then of course we had the Armory deck, making her the only hero with this full product pathline. And that is wonderful to see and to strive for, but again, going back to what they said statistically, right? It's not that Aurora was necessarily dominant by performance, she was dominant by community adoption. So pushing her in all these different facets was that kind of the mistake, right? So she will be back, and then again, Ira with her current Welcome deck, which will rotate out, but is still the current Welcome deck, although not applicable for Blitz, and then of course the actual Armory deck, which personally I still think should have that flexibility to be converted into a Blitz deck, be it either swapping Ira out, or at least just giving new players that understanding. The Armory deck to me, right, with Class Constructed being the main format for the game, I would just like to see that flexibility, right? It's not a matter of whether or not a deck can do it. It's a matter of whether it's relevant to the current time, right? And at some point, I'm sure you'll be able to pick up a Gravy Bones Armory deck, and he might have LL'd, right? And you can use it for Blitz, but you can't use it for Class Constructed or something like that. So I don't see any downside to them printing all Armory products with the ability to, again, take out X amount of cards and convert it to Blitz, regardless of legality, right? Just to, again, help new players understand deck construction and design, or even just translate the cards over to a different hero. Now, big crux of the quick LLing of Aurora, right? So she's coming back, and James himself has sort of indicated that, you know, hold on to your cards, wait, you'll have purpose again. But the curiosity to me is, that's so price gated, right? And personal mentality and personal circumstance. So this mentality of hold your cards and buy into another hero in the meantime, or sell your cards and buy into another hero in the meantime, is a big if, because, I mean, she's like $1,000 deck. Now, granted, when it comes to specifically Lightning and Runeblade cards, there's not a whole lot of them, right? In fact, these 5 to me, are the dominant ones, and none of them are, you know, super expensive. It's all those other filler pieces that you can definitely sell into other heroes, although Runeblade wise, you have Florian and you have Vincent at the moment, right? So Again, whether the cards are a direct, I know Carapace definitely gets run in Florian, I believe, right? But strictly speaking, for a lot of people who just subscribe to the competitive side of the game, right, maintaining one deck, the whole model is I get my deck up and running, allows, that's fine. I will transition over to another hero and therefore liquidate my cards. I won't hold on to them, right? So think of it conceptually like this. You spent $500 on a deck, and again, this is under the ballpark to me, right? Especially if you're starting from nothing. Are you okay with having to spend another $500 while you sit on that $500 spent? Or if it was, again, that lower price of entry where everything was reined in a bit, right? I think I spent $200 and now I have to spend another $200 is definitely a bit more forgiving. And we have been talking about, the cost of the game for a little while. So again, if everything was reined in, events and situations like this being, a bit more commonplace, and in that sense it has been since, we've done Mistveil now to Aurora back to back, and that's relatively a short time span too. But I do think that, again, reining in the cost side of specific play pieces would definitely be nice and would definitely help with this sort of mentality. For any of you out there who were, hardline Aurora players, are you going to hold your cards, or are you going to flip them and then just buy back if it excites you, right? Because, yeah, it's definitely nice to reward people for maintaining collections and having the majority of cards, but there's definitely a lot of people not in that situation. Definitely a lot of people who like the competitive side of it, and again, will maintain one or two decks and continue to swap and flip and trade. Now, the big exciting one for me, right? Or at least the one more relevant to what we've been talking about lately. So value proposition aims for long-term gratification and prolonged utility. So again, we go back to this idea of, well, should a play piece really equate to a collectible piece? And I would definitely say Schism of Chaos is a collectible piece, but, cold foil to a non-foil Shelter of the Storm, they're a lot closer than what I would necessarily like to see, because of course, cold foil Schism is a lot harder to pull. So yeah, there's nothing wrong with awarding long-term gratification for holding on to X cards. I just think that X cards should exclude, generally speaking, the cards sought after for play, right? Maintaining a collection of Command & Conquers or Shelter from the Storm now from the Hunted, right? Should that necessarily have the same long-term gratification as pulling a cold foil, legendary cold foil Fable, and holding on to that, right? That's my personal mentality, right? And I'm welcome to hear yours. Now, general pricing of play pieces presents an opportunity for more high caliber reprints. So currently these are some of the most expensive generics, Majestics in the game, right? With Shelter from the Storm right there at the top, Warmonger's Diplomacy and Weakest Link, and then everything drops down a little bit. Call to the Grave and Line Strike around 30-40, and then everything else is around the 20s. So the three standout cards are definitely Shelter, Warmongers, and Weakest Link. But then we can sort of circle back to this phrasing of high caliber reprint, right? So when, again, I think of high caliber, it's either price or desirability. So my mind settles on the generics. Now, again, there is a high caliber reprint in High Seas confirmed, right? And more reprints to come in the expansion slot, as well as other products going forward. So there are definitely other cards for them to hit, right? Fellings, Plow Unders. There's a couple specific talented / class cards that could definitely be, up for reprinting. But when it comes to High Seas, yeah, we get to speculate a little, right? So, Inline Strike and Codex Frailty were the front runners, probably still the front runners to me, right? But a card to throw in there, definitely New Horizon, right? Now that we know what's going on with Marlin and Harpoons, New Horizon and Death Dealer, right? And that combo shenanigans isn't necessarily going to be the point of focus, so it doesn't have to be New Horizon, but I could definitely see it being on the table just because, again, it is kind of a costly legendary. Now, comparison-wise by count, right? So, Inline Strike, going off of just Welcome to Rathe, there's roughly 17,500 playsets. Codex of Frailty, significantly less, at 10,800 playsets. Now, Inline Strike was also featured in the history product. We don't have the exact numbers, but generally speaking, the question becomes, Inline Strike, do we divide it by every class, and then Codex of Frailty by 2? Since Inline Strike can slot into most classes, while Codex is just in Assassin / Ranger. But generally speaking, I think there's the ability for either of these to show up, right? Again, slap some alt art on there. A legendary printing of Inline Strike, I think, would be a lot more palatable than upscaling the race of Command & Conquer, right? Which was a lot more desired by the community for play as a legendary. Now, New Horizon does also become a little bit relevant since, its copies is also only around 13,000, so that's in the same ballpark of our Codex and Inline Strike when it comes to how many you need to actually play, right? So copies, one copy of a New Horizon compared to playsets of Codex or Inline Strike. But two other cards I think should be on the table, right? Especially the first one, Balance of Justice. So Balance of Justice having, generally speaking, a decent chance of being relevant to the high seas meta, with its effect of draw a card, activate only if your opponent has drawn 2 or more cards this turn, I think definitely puts it prime, because it is one of the most expensive generic legendaries, right? If not the most expensive generic legendary at this point. And of course, we saw with Tunic, we saw with Arcanite, right? They got reprints. So yeah, I would definitely say Balance of Justice to me might be higher than Lion Strike, Codex, or New Horizon. But another one, just to throw out there, would definitely be Shelter from the Storm. Although this one, I'd say we're playing Devil's Advocate, because if Shelter from the Storm got a quick reprint in high seas, that would not be so great, right? From the perspective of LSS knowing exactly what they're doing with cards and desirability and having that lined up, ready to go. So, yeah, I'm going to say Balance of Justice, right? What do you think? I think most people go back to Codex, potentially, Line Strike. I've seen no Horizon here or there. But, there we go. That'll do it. Let me know your thoughts. How did you find the dev talk? Quite refreshing, right? Especially because they sort of dance around reprints and that and some of the other talk stuff, right? So, yeah, beautiful to see, beautiful to hear. Hope you enjoyed.